It's time for the 3304 Sports Podcast with your hosts Dan Steinbach, Kolbjorn Bergstrom, and Brady Schlesman.
Welcome into the 3304 Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Steinbach. I'm joined this week by Kolbjorn Bergstrom and newcomer to the program, not necessarily, but he's joining Kolbjorn and I, Brady Schlesman. Welcome aboard. Brady, how you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
No problem. We're happy to have you. Kolbjorn, how has your week been going?
It's been going great. It's been a bit busy, but, happy to be here and very happy to have Brady on board. Bit of change up.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully our listeners haven't gotten sick of us, so we're adding some new blood to the mix. All right, so we have a really good show for you today. 3304 Sports Podcast available on Anchor and Spotify, along with the 3304 Sports YouTube page. So I want to kind of just jump right into this because anyone who's been listening the past couple of weeks with Kolbjorn and I, Virginia Tech basketball has been kind of our bread and butter of this podcast for the last few weeks because of all the news surrounding it. And I mean, it's just another week going by. It's the same old thing. The game against Louisville was canceled. And then now the game against North Carolina State was canceled for this Saturday, meaning that men's basketball is done. Like, it's just done. We're going to the tournament, ACC postseason play. And with this, Virginia Tech men's basketball has now only played 2 games in a month, because when this podcast goes up, we are recording the day of posting. So this will be coming out Friday, March 5th. We are recording this in that afternoon. So tomorrow, the Saturday, March 6th, will mark 1 month since the Miami game, the Miami overtime game that Virginia Tech won. They've only played 2 games since then. The Georgia Tech game, which they lost by double digits, and then the Wake Forest game where they blew Wake Forest out of the water. With these last 2 games being canceled, it looks like Virginia Tech will finish with a double bye going into the ACC tournament. They can't finish any lower than 4th in the ACC standings. Here's where I'm at. I'm still of the same mindset that a team with this many breaks in between really does not get to show us the extent of their potential. I mean, we saw them in the Georgia Tech game. They probably would have looked like a different team had they not had such a long break. And going into the ACC tournament, especially with that double bye, especially with these games being canceled, it's going to be the same story. And as we get closer to the ACC tournament, the questions that linger become, okay, will contact tracing still be a thing for the Hokies during games? Like, will they have to forfeit or just give up ACC tournament games? Is that a thing that can happen? Brady, you're new with us here in these last couple weeks, so I wanted to get your opinion on everything that's kind of been going on. And as we look towards the ACC tournament, what's your thought process on the team and how they're going to look going forward into the postseason?
Yeah, I believe that it's going to take maybe 1 or 2 games to, dust off the cobwebs, and whether they can get past those games, past the, second round, third round, going in the quarterfinals, semifinals, is still a question still remaining to be seen, I believe. But I think they can do it. And as Virginia Tech, I would be looking at it as kind of a tune-up for the NCAA tournament. I don't think it's a necessity to win the ACC. Obviously, they would want to do that. But I think realistically, they are trying to play their best basketball coming up. So I think they got to look at themselves in the mirror and go, okay, what do we need to work on for the NCAA tournament? We haven't played a game in a while, so it might take a couple days to knock off the rust, couple game speed that they may not be used to yet.
Kolbjorn, do you want to hop in there?
Yeah, I mean, I actually agree with all what Brady was saying there, but I mean, to add to it, as we talked about, our last 2 games that we played recently, which was against Georgia Tech and Wake Forest, were very much different games. The Georgia Tech game, you could show that it was shown that, we were rusty after having 17 days off, and we were a bit sloppy on either side of the ball. But then when it came to the Wake Forest game, it was just looks like we couldn't miss. We were having a great game. Seems like we were on form. And I think that is going to be a lot of help, momentum wise, to go into the ACC tournament. But I do agree with the fact of, do you want to win, everything that you're part of? Yeah, it'd be amazing too. But at the end of the day, you really need at least a game or two in this ACC tournament to prepare for the big one, the NCAA March Madness tournament. And at the end of the day, if you win it, it's wonderful. It'll probably kick up your seeding. It'll make you feel really confident and great. But if you can at least look good in the 1 or 2 games that you play in the ACC tournament, you can still have that confidence going into the March Madness tournament and hopefully be able to bring that confidence to the court like you were able to. I mean, I know Wake Forest has been in a bad run form of late, but hopefully you can bring that confidence from the Wake Forest game and some good competition in the ACC tournament to play well in March Madness to move deep in the tournament.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I just kind of wanted to turn this into our semi-NCAA tournament preview, not necessarily a preview, but just I can't get past this thought that if Virginia Tech has to lose a game in this ACC tournament, what is this sort of scenario going to look like in the NCAA tournament later on in the month? I mean, this is a team that right now is hovering around possibly a 6 seed. And throughout this season, I've held the opinion that they have Sweet 16 potential. I mean, that's just a team that, what happens if you can't play your first round game? I have no idea what the contingency plan is. I think that we need to hear more from the NCAA, from the tournament committee, whoever's in charge of this thing. I need to hear more of the plan surrounding what's going on. I know we're bubbling. I know we're doing all of it in one state, just separate stadiums across Indiana. So it concerns me with how this tournament's going to go down, because what happens if, forget Virginia Tech, even if you don't think that they're some team that can make this big run to the Final Four or win a national championship, what if a team like Michigan, who earlier on in the season had a 20-plus day absence, and they've come back and they've played well, but what if a team like that gets hit by COVID again and they can't play, and all of a sudden the tournament loses one of its favorites? I mean, Michigan's right behind Gonzaga and Baylor on odds sites regarding who they think is going to win. So that's where I'm at right now. It's, yes, you could potentially lose games in the ACC tournament, especially with the fact that going into it, we don't know how they're going to play their first game. And actually, it's good that it might be good that they have this double bye, but I don't know if it will be, because it's just another day that they don't play. And we've seen that more time off has given this team a disadvantage. It can depend on their opponent as well. I'm actually looking on Twitter right now, and I'm finding that our very own David Cunningham has a little spreadsheet going on about the ACC standings, and dependent on the games, he has tonight's Friday games on how they impact the standings for the ACC tournament. And then, of course, Saturday's games, there are more, some of the teams higher up in the standings will be playing. Tonight we have Boston College, Miami, and Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, how that impacts the seeding kind of in the middle and more towards the bottom. The top 4 in the ACC will be untouched after tonight, but you go into Saturday's games with more permutations of the standings, basically up for, who's going to be at the top. How's the ACC tournament going to look? So yeah, I just don't know. I don't know where the ACC tournament's going to go. I don't know where March Madness is going to go with all this COVID. It's just been a mess, in my opinion. And I need to hear more of their plan on how they're going to run this tournament successfully before it just turns out to be some broken mess. I do want to say we are planning on potentially having a March Madness specific podcast after the release of the bracket. We can give you a preview. So be on the lookout for that here at 3304 Sports. But I do want to talk about something that I came across this week regarding the NCAA tournament. And that is the fact that the net rankings that the NCAA has switched to as sort of this main focus. They've done it for the last couple of years on their seeding for the NCAA tournament. This year has been different in the fact that so many teams are losing games, not losing games, but having games canceled, that it just gives the data and the analytics less to work with. And this is where you end up with a situation like this, where right now, Colgate from the Patriot League, who has played only 12 games against 3 teams, is 9th. They're a top 10 team according to these rankings. And this is where I think a lot of people will go to say that these rankings are broken. I don't think they're broken. I think that we are just experiencing a broken season where we're not going to have a season like this again. I draw a parallel to Ohio State in the college football playoff. They only played 6 games where everyone else was playing upwards of 10. And everyone was saying, oh, they don't deserve it because they didn't play enough games. I'm not saying Colgate deserves to be in the playoff or in the NCAA tournament, but I'm also saying that Ohio State in a normal year would. And Colgate in a normal year probably would see the success be moving forward, and they would be more of a at-large type team. I know that their conference is weak, but right now they're not even the number 1 seed in their conference. What are your guys' opinions on this? Because I find this ridiculous that we're looking at these rankings potentially this year as somewhat serious, but it just adds, I think, to the narrative that some people aren't going to take this tournament seriously. I mean, a team like Colgate probably won't get at-large consideration, but everyone's going to point to the net rankings and say, oh, but you're taking these seriously. I don't know. It's just up in the air. What are your guys' opinions on this?
Well, I think that, if at large consideration, whether or not they get that, I mean, it's going to come down if they can win the conference. If they win their conference, of course they're in. But if they don't, then in my opinion, they don't deserve to get in. If they're in such a weak conference and they're ranked 9th in the net rankings, well, then they're a top 10 team, theoretically, so they should have no problem winning their tournament. That's the way I see it anyways.
I mean, I agree with your analysis on it. I think the NET rankings are very much, you've got to have the data for it. And unlike most college basketball seasons, you don't have the, a lot of teams have had to miss games due to COVID or due to scheduling and trying to make sure, that you're keeping the team healthy. And you don't have, like with Colgate, they're 11-1. So you don't have all the games that the team like Colgate would normally have. I mean, FSU, top 11 team, a team that could be pushing higher in the ACC like higher for the NCAA tournament if they win the ACC regular season, which still looks like they're going to, and if they win the ACC tournament as well. Like, they have a smaller sample size, but they could be possibly higher. It's the same with Colgate. There's really not enough to look at, so I'm not really putting it much on the rankings this year. I think you just have to really look at the games they play, and particularly the tournament for a team in the Patriot division is going to be huge because, if you win your tournament, you're in the tourney, in like the big tourney. So
I think that what we say ultimately it won't matter because obviously we're not on the selection committee, but it will be interesting to see how they do it, because will they come out and say this year is different, we're not really going to put so much focus on this, we're going to go more to a traditional style, or will they? I think that ultimately a Colgate is the only team where something like this could happen. I mean, I'm just looking at the net rankings right now, and all the other teams in these net rankings will probably end up in the tournament. They're definitely the outlier, and they're a big outlier because, I mean, think about it. If a team like Colgate makes it, but a team on the bubble, like say a Michigan State doesn't, there's going to be some outrage. And I don't think that a situation like that's going to happen regarding an at-large bid for Colgate. So I just don't think that that's how the committee will end up doing things this year. I think it's just interesting because a lot of people might see this as the net rankings just being a broken system. I don't think they're broken. I think that the fact that we have not enough data just makes them look weird. And this season just doesn't have the right ingredients for a true analytical analysis of everything that's happened and moving forward into the postseason. So in conclusion, that I think that we've talked about for the last couple of weeks, college basketball is broken and this season might not count. Who knows? But Virginia Tech basketball has another couple of games canceled this week and is going into the ACC tournament after another long break. And we don't know what to expect from this team. And then right after that, they have to suit up and go into March Madness. And it definitely will be nothing like we've ever seen before in the tournament setting, especially if something big happens. But we can save that for a later date, especially as we draw closer to Selection Sunday. I want to switch to a little bit of news in the NBA. Pistons forward Blake Griffin was bought out today by the Pistons. Now, I am somewhat of, I guess, a Pistons fan. And I will say, not even as a fan, I don't think you have to be a fan to admit this, but the Blake Griffin trade probably messed up the Pistons' future in more ways than one. For starters, his cap space hit was way too big. No one was ever going to take that contract after they acquired him. Now, he played well. He had an All-NBA selection in one of his seasons there, the year that they went to the playoffs. But other than that, I mean, you gave up Tobias Harris, who is still a serviceable player, and you gave up a first-round pick who turned out to be Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who is looking like a young star in the making. There were just so many mistakes with the Pistons, and this was a previous regime that signed him and now a new regime with Troy Weaver. So this type of move seemed to make sense, him moving away from the Pistons. But now there are reports that many contender teams are looking to add him. I want to get your guys' opinion on who those teams might be and where you think his best fit is.
Well, for the teams that are going to sign him, a lot of the teams that have been talked about, it's kind of like the big three that have been talked about as of late. It's been Brooklyn ever since they got KD and Kyrie. It's the Lakers with LeBron and AD, and then you have the Clippers with Kawhi and PG-13. When I've kind of seen those teams floated around, whether it's from fans, whether it's from media as well, since this has been breaking news as of today. I don't know. The Lakers seem like it's going to be not so great of a fit if he was to go there because AD isn't much of a fan of playing the five. From what I've seen, like he likes to play more of like the power forward type position, which is where Blake tends to play. So I just don't know chemistry wise if that would work. Which then leaves you with Brooklyn and the Clippers, in which for Brooklyn, they made the big trade to get James Harden this season and got rid of all their defense. So, Blake isn't really going to be massive in the defensive department, which I think is something they should be looking to add. However, Blake Griffin is a star in his own right. He has been a good scorer and someone who, he's going to be the fourth option on that team if he was to play. He'd be behind KD and Kyrie and James Harden. If you get him in, he doesn't really have that type of pressure on him, but I guess it's going to be all down to money in that case. I don't know the money figures for the Brooklyn Nets, but I would assume that they're pretty well tied up with money from the big three contracts they have. So, Brooklyn sounds like a great destination. It sounds like a place where he could fit and he could, not have the pressure on him to be the Blake Griffin of old, but just someone who can help contribute. But I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where Blake will end up, or if teams are going to want to sign him, because I don't know how much he's been able to play this season. I haven't specifically looked at the Pistons, so.
Yeah, I think, that it came out that the Nets are the top place right now for him, but if I were the Nets, I don't think you really need Blake Griffin. Of course, it'd be nice to have another all-star on the team, but honestly, yeah, they need defense, like you said, and Blake Griffin doesn't really bring that per se. I mean, he brings 20 points a game, which he's never going to get on the Nets because they already have 3 20-point scorers. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see. I actually think the Lakers fit might work. You know, because we've seen at times with AD hurt right now, they're not the same team at all without AD. And so I think Brady and Blake Griffin can relieve pressure from LeBron and AD of having to score 30 a night. If you bring in a guy like Blake Griffin, they can take nights off. They can rest up for the playoffs. And I think that could go a long way when Blake Griffin's on the court with them and when they're off the court and it's just Blake Griffin. So I actually think the Lakers fit might be promising.
I thought it was just an interesting bit of news today. It was something that had been expected. I mean, he had been sitting for a couple of weeks now, just because he knew that he had no future with the team. And, as much of a name as he is, I think a lot of people see the name and get excited. Although I wish the best for the guy, he definitely is not the Blake Griffin of old. I mean, that's no secret. His knees are shot, so his athleticism is all but gone. Whatever he can provide for you, I think it could be something, definitely, if he has limited minutes. Because if you're a team that's looking to make a long postseason run, if you sign Blake Griffin, I don't think you should be playing him a lot in the regular season. Showcase him a little bit. He's like a 4th or 5th option on your team. But he does a lot of load management. And then when it comes to the playoffs, if he can show some scoring prowess, then he becomes valuable to you. I don't think he brings defense to a team like the Nets, who, as you guys have said, need it desperately because their defense is horrendous. But yeah, I think it's just interesting because the NBA community is definitely going to react to wherever he goes. And I honestly don't know how much of an impact he'll make on a team like the Lakers or the Nets, who, as of right now, are already in, championship contention with their teams. And I don't know how much a Blake Griffin adds to that. Speaking of former top level players who still can potentially bring something to the table, JJ Watt was the headline of the NFL this past week or two with where he was going to end up signing. Now, Kolbjorn and we talked about this on a previous podcast where we thought he would end up going after the Texans and Watt decided to mutually part ways. He ends up going to the Arizona Cardinals. And I think this was a curious signing for a lot of people in the NFL, including myself. I found that this was a bit of a shock. I didn't consider him as a fit. So at the end of the day, I think this does come down to the money of the contract because it's $23 million guaranteed over 2 years, which some places have reported that they may have offered more. I'm not sure how credible those sources are, but in terms of being a team that can win and being a team where he fits well, I think there were definitely better spots for him than Arizona. I mean, I don't know. The NFC West is crazy. You have a lot of Russell Wilson talk going on with Seattle. You don't know what Matthew Stafford's going to look like with the Rams. You don't know what the Niners are going to look like. What were your guys' reactions to JJ Watt going to Arizona? And I mean, I found it funny personally that he was the one that broke the news with a tweet of him lifting in a Cardinals shirt. I was a bit shocked. I want to start with Kolbjorn because we've talked about this before and we gave our opinions on where we think he should go and where we think the best fit would be. So I want to get your opinion on this.
My first thing is the media had me in the first half. That first week after we dropped, it was my first podcast on when we talked about it. And that week following, when they were talking about JJ Watt, it was instantly news with the Browns. And I remember I talked about that on the podcast, and I'm like, did I really? did I hit the nail on the head with that? And then it didn't turn out. So, I mean, overall, it was still a surprise team. I did feel like it was going to be a surprise team that was going to get him, but I love the fit in Arizona. I think DeAndre Hopkins probably had a good bit to do with it since they are friends. They were with Houston for a long time. So He could have probably been sold by Hopkins a little bit. But to talk about kind of how JJ fits into this team, it's probably one of two scenarios, which gives Arizona overall a bit of flexibility. He's someone who in Houston was fitting the 3 gap a lot, and the 3 gap coming on the outside. And for Arizona, that's what they were running. They were running a 3-4 with Jones and Reddick coming off the edge this past season, from what I remember. So this is probably going to entice Hassan Reddick to come back with how much of a step forward he took this year. He was great for Arizona. So if they are able to keep that defense, J.J. Watt and Reddick on the same side with Jones rushing the other is going to be lovely to see. And if Reddick doesn't come back, they could transition possibly to a 4-3 where Watt and Jones are coming off each edge. And yet again, that just sounds frightening to come up against for a quarterback. And as has been talked about, like last week from us, Russell Wilson wants protection. He's mad he doesn't get the protection. And now he has one of the best edge rushers of our generation of, football watching. And he's not going to be happy about that. I kind of feel like that's just like come on. Like, I'm already asking for offensive line help, and now the Cardinals get J.J. Watt with the 49ers good defensive line, with the Rams good defensive line. For him, it's going to be a nightmare. For the Cardinals, I think this is really good, and I think the money at the end of the day isn't that big of a deal for them if they're able to push back into the playoffs over a team like Seattle and San Francisco.
Yeah,
Brady, I want to get you to jump in on this.
Yeah, I would agree with that. At first I thought, Arizona might be a little, like he said, he wanted to go to a contender, and you're going to an 8-8 team, but I think this could push them honestly to 10-6. I know they're in a really good division, but I think Seattle's, they're not the Seattle of old. They're not the Legion of Boom. We know that. So I think Seattle's sitting around 9-7. And like you said, talk about Russell Wilson. We don't know if he's going to stay in Seattle, especially after this when he's asking for offensive line help. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether they hang on to Hassan Reddick. They just gave J.J. Watt a lot of money, so will they give Hassan Reddick the same? I don't know. I would probably lean that they aren't going to, just because that would be a lot of money tied up in the defensive line, that they might not be able to disperse elsewhere. So I would say that Hassan Reddick's probably going to leave, but I don't know. Maybe not.
Definitely some questions for the rest of the Cardinals free agency period, but they definitely made a big splash with the name in this addition for their defense. I want to do a quick audible here real quick, guys. Just something small that I just came across. So we're going to do a little mock draft. We're going to have some fun at the end of the show today. But I just came across this. So the Draft Network is reporting live. Some colleges are having their pro days because we don't have a combine this year. And they said that Georgia football cornerback Eric Stokes on the Georgia live stream for their pro day just ran a 4.25 40. And the fastest 40 at the combine was John Ross, a 4.22. Do you guys think, and we can just make this really quick, I think that is probably false, and that these schools are definitely going to try to bump their players up. Like, whenever Virginia Tech has their pro day, they're going to bump Caleb Farley's 40 time by a couple milliseconds. What are you guys' reactions to this? What are your thoughts? Because, I mean, maybe he is that fast, but this is definitely going to be a strange combine season for these numbers, because I think that schools are going to try to do their best to help their prospects.
Yeah, I think you got to take it with like a grain of salt, honestly. I mean, every school is probably gonna, they're not bringing the laser technology that the combine has. They're going stopwatches, I believe. So it's not gonna be, a 4.25. Like, I honestly don't think he's running that, but he might be running like a 4.33 or something, which is still super fast. So. But I don't think he's running 4.25. But honestly, it would be interesting to see everyone's kind of, 40 times bumped up a little bit. And I think for scouts, I think they just got to look at the game film. What does he look like on tape? And got to take these measurables and these 40 times with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be a lot this year more on I think a good bit the combine like helps with seeing players comparatively to one another, like with speed and with strength and hand-eye coordination and whatnot. But I think that a big thing this year is going to be how they played and what you've been able to see of them. I think it's going to be a lot of, I would assume, because I'm not as involved in this process, that's just going to be a lot more film based, whether it's in games or whether it's from other things, since some players opted out this year. So.
Yeah, I just thought that was a little nugget that I came across that could be something fun to add in here, because as we get closer and closer to the draft, I think that we're going to see more stuff like this. I think that we're going to see some crazy combine numbers that for combine that doesn't exist. All right, before we hop into the mock draft to end our show today, I want to do a little quick segment. Kolbjorn came across an article or a piece of news regarding the NFL offseason, and I just wanted to touch on that. So, Kolbjorn, why don't you share with the class what you brought today?
We've seen it starting this week, but it was a tweet that was also talked about on the Pat McAfee podcast, which was specifically in regards to a tweet that Diana Rossini tweeted out, where she had been in contact with an NFL coach about cuts and restructures and all of that, kind of like as we're leading up into free agency, and the coach saying, quote, "It's going to be a massacre." And I find that to be crazy. I mean, I'll want to hear what y'all have on this as well, but we've seen a lot of stuff happening this week. The Saints had a surprise cut. There's talks now of like Andrew Norwell, the Jaguars could be traded, but he's a big part of their line. Trey Turner for the Chargers, a really good guard who was formerly with Carolina. He could get traded or cut. That was news that dropped like about 10 minutes ago that Schefter said that they're shopping him. You've seen some other big names getting cut. You saw, I think it was today as well, Darius Slay now has 2 gap years in his contract, to where his contract still runs out in 2023, but he's going to get paid through 2025. They've just spread the money longer to where he doesn't have as much of an immediate cap hit. With the cap going now to like 181, 182, a lot of this stuff's going to have to happen to be able to get some of the names in this free agency, including because there's so many big names in this free agency. So I think that there's going to be a lot more to come. I don't remember exactly when the free agency period starts. Is it like March 9th? But it's going to be coming up. It's right around the corner. So we're going to be seeing this stuff happening a lot, maybe even this weekend. So for your favorite teams, if there's a player that's taken up a lot of cap, look out to see if there's any news on them, because you could see a surprise cut from that player even as well.
Free agency officially starts the 17th. March 9th is the franchise tag deadline, and we're going to see a couple of names around that day, most notably Dak Prescott. Now, yep. I just want to ask you this, because when this sort of thing comes up, it interests me. Was it mentioned how different this was going to be to previous years? Because I feel like every time around this year, we have surprise cuts, we have surprise trades or what have you. Was there something mentioned about how a magnitude of this is greater than past seasons? Or do you think this is just a coach saying what's on his mind regarding, oh, we're going to have so many of our guys on our team gone this offseason? Well, where does this fall on the spectrum?
Yeah, I get you. I don't know if this is a full conversation with the NFL head coach. I don't know if this is something that Rossini maybe even recorded and has posted or anything else along those lines. All I know is that is the quote from Rossini, and I think to be hearing something like of as grand of a word as a massacre to what's going to be happening with a lot of teams around the league. I think because the cap kind of like it came down to the 181, 182. So you're going to have a lot of these teams that are already in cap trouble this offseason that are going to have even more cap trouble. The Philadelphia Eagles are, as I said, with Darius Slay and with other players. Jason Kelsey was mentioned today as one of the players that they could see themselves cutting, or they're going to really hope that he'll restructure because Kelsey's a big name in Philly. But you have a lot of teams that you kind of have to make the ends meet. You have a lot of teams that are already in horrible cap situations, Philly and New Orleans in particular. I guess the good news is for people, if you listen to this and you grew up on the most local team of like Washington, at least for my area, they are in a bad cap situation. So for some teams, they're not going to have too big issues because they already have solid cap going into this offseason. But it's going to be really interesting to see. I think that quote was just kind of like one in a slew of a conversation. I don't know if the conversation has been posted. I actually haven't been able to see the Pat McAfee clip. I've had a fairly busy week, so I don't know if she was able to give more context to it. She most likely has. I would implore that you look up that clip if you want to. But it's going to be very interesting, and there's already names that have been talked about that I'm surprised by, particularly in when we're going to be talking about the mock draft. I'll probably talk about it more. Trey Turner, like, he's been a good guard throughout his career, and if he gets moved from the Los Angeles Chargers rather than them keeping him, like, they need some line help already. It's going to be a bit crazy if he goes.
All right. So I want to thank you for bringing that to this podcast this week. All right. We're going to have a little bit of fun now. We're going to wrap up this week's edition of the 3304 Sports Podcast with a three-way mock draft for, our NFL teams. Now, we've decided to skip the first pick because we all believe that the Jacksonville Jaguars will take Trevor Lawrence, as should anyone listening, because there is no way that is not happening. I don't care what any rumors come out. I think that it's a 100% lock and we should move on. Now, we are going to be going snake draft, and the first order will be Kolbjorn, myself, and then Brady. So we'll be starting at pick number 2 with Kolbjorn of the New York Jets. No trading will be allowed, but we will be mentioning if we think a trade might happen. I think the way we're going to attack this is all three of us are saying what we would do as GMs. I don't know. I'm not sure, but we're either saying we're the GM, it's what we would do with that pick, or we're maybe saying what we think will happen or what we think should happen. So, why not just kick it off with the second pick, New York Jets. Kolbjorn, take it away.
Yeah, hopefully it'll give us a good start on this. But kind of what we've talked about coming into this is the two ideas of what exactly we would do and what's going to happen if the pick is retained. So kind of a matter of if we would move the pick, if we were the team, and, if the team has to stay at that pick, we haven't coordinated like a big like trades and everything. So if the pick is locked in at that team, or if the team is locked in at that pick, if the Jets are, in this case, are locked in at 2, they're going to take X player. So in my personal opinion, the longer that these Sam Darnold trade talks have kind of really waned down, and it sounds like the Jets owners even like, yeah, we'll hear stuff about Sam Darnold. We'll listen, but not kind of definitively saying that he's going to go. I kind of feel like they're going to stick with Sam Darnold this year. So I think this pick is going to eventually end up being traded, whether it's to the Falcons or the Panthers or one of these teams that are really looking for like one of these young QBs in this draft. I don't know. But I think that at the end of the day, I'm kind of feeling that the Jets are going to move this pick. But with the Jets on the clock for this pick, I think it would have to be a quarterback. I think that's really the one position where for value, it would make sense for the Jets. And I would probably go Zach Wilson. He's very explosive, and he'd be a great corner piece to build around for Saleh's era in New York.
All right, so now the Miami Dolphins are on the clock with the 3rd overall pick. This is my pick. So my thought process here was Penei Sewell or bust, because he's the best player available on the board. And I have faith in Tua Tagovailoa. Now, if the New York Jets were to take Penei Sewell, I think this is a trade down spot, because I think that there are going to be a lot of quarterback hungry teams. I know that a player such as Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, Kyle Pitts, those offensive type players are being mocked at this spot. Personally, I don't think I would go skill player with the 3rd overall pick. I like a lot of these guys, but I think that draft pick that high, you don't go skill player. I think you go Penei Sewell, you build up that offensive line. And this draft is stacked with quality offensive line talent, with decent wide receiver depth. This is a really good draft for those two positions. So I'm comfortable with staying put and taking Penei Sewell. If he was not available, I would want the Dolphins to trade down. So next up will be the Falcons and the Bengals, both on the clock for Brady.
Yeah, so for the Falcons, I would trade down, honestly. I know a lot of people have them taking quarterbacks, probably Justin Fields. If Zach Wilson somehow fell to 4, I think I would take him because I think he's a really good player. And kind of in his own level below Trevor Lawrence and above Fields and Lance and Mac Jones. But I think, I would trade down and look to get a tackle or a corner later or an edge player. But since I have to pick, I'm going to reach and take Rashawn Slater, the tackle out of Northwestern. They need help.
I like that pick. That's actually very interesting. He's a
Yeah,
guy
they need
that
help everywhere. But, yeah, I think you got to go offensive lineman.
Okay. That's a very interesting pick because some people, if Penei Sewell's off the board, have Rashawn Slater going to your next pick, the Bengals. So for the Bengals, now with Rashawn Slater and Penei Sewell off the board, who do you have them taking?
Yeah, so if I was the Bengals, I'd be very upset right now because they need to tackle really bad. With that being said, I think Christian Darrisaw would be too much of a reach at 5. So then I would trade that pick as well and try to go down and take Darrisaw later, maybe around 10 or 11, to make sure they can get him before, teams like the Chargers or, the Washington football team who need tackles. But now I think I'm going to take Kyle Pitts, tight end for Florida. They have. I think AJ Green's going to leave. They have T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, but I think adding Pitts would just with Burrow, I think that could be, something special in Cincinnati. So.
All right, so we are now at the number 6 overall pick, Philadelphia Eagles, my selection. Now, this is interesting because I have my big board, and there's been the question mark being thrown around of, will they look quarterback here? And I'm always a believer of you have to get quarterback right. Now, I like Justin Fields. I really like Zach Wilson. I have Zach Wilson number 1 on my board. If he was still here, I would take him. Now it's my question of, is Justin Fields, because I believe Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson are both worthy of taking at this spot and saying, okay, we can move on from Jalen Hurts. I don't know if Justin Fields is that, even though I like Fields a lot. But with all that being said, I think the Eagles need to get better at their skill positions. And it's just, they're so bad there, and it can only help you evaluate Jalen Hurts. And I think the Eagles, honestly, with everything that's been going on, might end up having to go into a long rebuild, especially if Jalen Hurts doesn't work out this year. They take another year or two to build this roster back up to its Super Bowl level. So I think they end up taking Jamar Chase, who's my wide receiver, number 1.
Scared me for a second talking quarterback. I thought we were going to have a big shakeup, but yeah, no, I definitely agree with all the picks that have come before in Jamar Chase and whatnot. But yeah, no, I definitely agree that they need to upgrade the skill position. And I mean, I hadn't even thought about their getting Zach Wilson. So yeah, if they trade up to get Zach Wilson, I really like the Eagles quarterback. But if they were able to move up, I wouldn't be surprised if they drafted Zach Wilson and moved on from Jalen Hurts. I like Hurts, but Wilson does look really good. But now we're at pick 7, which is currently owned by the Detroit Lions. I I think that there's a possibility this pick could be traded. They have Jared Goff. It is, quote, the guy that they want to go with going into the future. So I don't really think they're going to be looking quarterback here, particularly as this is a team that does need to kind of rebuild in their own right. But there's something else that they've been missing. They're going to be missing this offseason that they really need to hit here, and it's the wide receiver position. When you look at their team, they're most likely going to be losing Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay. They have brought in Tyrell Williams this week, but Tyrell Williams and Danny Amendola, I just don't think are going to cut it. And with all the really good receiving talent in this draft, that's where I'd be looking. So at this point, for most people, Jamar Chase is like your number one, and it's a toss-up between Devonta Smith and Jalen Waddle, who you would prefer. And for me, I'm going to go with the Heisman winner, Devonta Smith. I really like his play. He's looked very dynamic for Alabama. And I think when you're really looking at it for a team like Detroit, you need to get that explosive number one receiver. And I think either of them could provide it, but I really think that Devonta Smith would be the guy you'd want to nab here, just particularly with how he's played last season alone, but even the season before that, he's been great with all the receivers they've had there, with Henry Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy and Jalen Waddle and himself. It's been such a great class that they've had over the past 2 years. And now it's also pick 8, which I'm going to be calling, and it's the Carolina Panthers. I think that personally that they'd be trading up with this pick at this point. They've shopped Teddy Bridgewater. They were kind of fielding some offers for Deshaun Watson and Matthew Stafford. Reports came out that they had a good offer for Stafford, and there's still a lot of talk that they're trying to ship picks and Teddy Bridgewater for Deshaun Watson. So it doesn't seem like they want to stick with Teddy. It feels like they want to move on and get a better quarterback for this team. And in this mock, I mean, there's only 2 quarterbacks that have been taken. Trevor Lawrence, which is the no surprise number 1, and Zach Wilson, which I think if the Jets stay there is the no surprise number 2. So since no quarterback's gone, it's then just the toss-up of who do you think the Panthers would want to go for, Justin Fields, Trey Lance, or Mac Jones. And if they aren't confident enough in Bridgewater and they're trying to shop him, I think that they should be going for a quarterback that is starter ready. When I was originally making this, I actually didn't think Fields was going to fall to this point. Now that I look at it, I probably should have assumed that he was going to. But I had Trey Lance or Mac Jones kind of as my toss-up. But since Fields is here, I think he's someone that wherever he gets drafted, it's going to be to a team that's going to start him day one. I think he's most likely to get that over Trey Lance or Mac Jones. So if the Panthers need a new starting quarterback and they want someone that's very dynamic, I think Justin Fields is your man. So that's who I'm going to go for at number 8.
Definitely a surprise fall. I think that the number 1 target for Justin Fields is the Falcons at 4, but they end up going for an offensive tackle, their offensive tackle 2 on their board, Sean Slater, in this mock. So now here I am at number 9. Now, when I was looking at this, I'll be honest, I didn't know where I wanted to go because I went to my number 1 thing was that I don't know how much confidence I have in Drew Lock. So I think quarterback is their number 1 need. And again, I put so much emphasis on the quarterback as the most important position in football. And when I look at mock drafts, I'm seeing a lot of defensive players. I'm seeing cornerbacks a lot of the time. And when I go to the Denver Broncos stats, I look at their stats from last season, I look at their team defense, team needs according to front office people, according to their fan base of who they would want. I'm looking and I'm seeing that they think that they need corners, but I'm looking and their team defense last year was average and their passing defense was pretty good. And this can be chalked up to the fact that they had a really good pass rush. But the fact was they gave up a lot of rushing touchdowns. They gave up more rushing touchdowns than passing touchdowns, which was the only team in the NFL to do that. So their rush defense stinks. So here's what I'm thinking with the Broncos. I'm going to go Trey Lance because I think that they need the quarterback. But I really like the idea, too, of potentially making a trade down and going for someone like a Christian Barmore, who is the number 1 interior defensive lineman in the draft and really helping with their run defense. In terms of run defense, you can look for another potentially a linebacker here. I know that might be a popular thing, but I don't value linebackers that much personally. I think that could end up being like a Micah Parsons or a JOK from Notre Dame. So I'm going to go Trey Lance here, get that quarterback position shored up. But if I was Denver, I could also look into trading down, helping my run defense.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, the most of the mocks I've seen have, them taking corner, which, yeah, you say Drew Lock. We don't know if they believe he's the guy or not. And I'm sure, we'll find out in 2 months or so. But now I have the 10th pick with Cowboys. And I'm going to go Caleb Farley, cornerback from Virginia Tech. I think.
Yes. Get that jersey, baby.
I think secondary is obviously the big question mark with them. They got Trayvon Diggs last year in the second round, who showed some bright spots, but also got burnt several times going downfield. So going with Caleb Farley with his athletic profile to shore up that secondary. Next pick, I got the Giants pick, so 2 NFC East back to back. Now, this one I'm teetering between 3 players. Micah Parsons, just because I have him as on my big board as 5th overall prospect. So for him falling to 11 would be a steal, but I don't think linebackers a need for them. You have Jalen Waddle. They could use a corner to pair with James Bradbury, Patrick Surtain, Kwity Paye. They need an edge. I'm gonna go Jalen Waddle. They just released Golden Tate, so they're in need of some playmakers on offense with the pair on Saquon and Evan Ingram. So I'm gonna go Jalen Waddle.
I love that pick. That's a really good one for him.
All right, so here I am with the San Francisco 49ers at 12. Now, here's my opinion. The San Francisco 49ers need a quarterback. I mean, if you look at this roster with a healthy Jimmy G, they made the Super Bowl, get a more dynamic player back there. You're probably looking at another Super Bowl contender. You're in a really tough division. You need to make sure you get that quarterback spot right. So on my big board for the 49ers, my first 3 slots are trade up. I would say that they would need to trade up to get someone. But aside from that, I'm looking at maybe some defense. And right now I have them at cornerback. Richard Sherman's probably going to go secondary, and that defense is just getting older. So adding in some new talent. I'm going to go with Patrick Surtain. I saw you putting in Mac Jones there, but trust me, I'm not taking Mac Jones. I don't like Mac Jones. I'm not taking him. I'm not taking him if I'm a quarterback hungry team. So I'm taking Patrick Surtain out of Alabama.
I was putting in Mac for a second because originally you were telling me that you weren't gonna go quarterback for Denver. You swerved me Denver, and then you swerved me again for 49ers. Good Lord.
I'm thinking, here's my thing. I don't like to reach if I don't think I have to. I think Mac Jones will go in the first round, but if I'm a quarterback hungry team, I'm just not taking him. That's me personally.
Oh no, I mean I love the pick of Patrick Surtain. Trust me, I was so sold with the Trey Lance pick that you were going to take Mac Jones there, but I got 13-14 now, so we're definitely not going to be touching up on quarterback here. Though with the Vikings, it might be a bit of a surprise because a lot of people, it's like, Kirk Cousins is going to be gone after next season most likely, and maybe you would bring in Mac Jones to sit that like this next season and then come in for him. But the Chargers are first here. And as we talked about Trey Turner, there is one thing that the Chargers really need to make an emphasis of. They have the quarterback. They need the protection. So now that you have Justin Herbert, you need to make sure that you protect Justin Herbert with everything you have. Spend however many picks you need, however much money you need. Herbert is going to be a huge part of this offense going into the future. He looked really good last year, and obviously, as kind of general fans, we can all just think that it's just going to be a rise up from here. So I'm going to go with another Virginia Tech representative with Christian Darrisaw with this pick. The left tackle they traded away with Russell Okung when they made the move to get Trey Turner. And overall, their whole line is a mess. But Christian Darrisaw has been a rock for our O-line. Our O-line is very strong, but he's definitely a huge part of that offensive line. And I think when you're putting him at left tackle for Herbert, you get that blind side protected. And I think those two can be a magical pairing for years to come. And then you have pick 14 with the Minnesota Vikings. And a lot of people are talking about offensive line. They've talked about Rashawn Slater. They talked about Elijah Barrett-Tucker coming out of USC. But to me, there's one thing that this team really has an issue with. It feels like a lot of offensive line are going to be coming out in this free agency. So I don't think that offensive line is much of a need here. It's really that defensive line. They've lost a lot of guys. They're going to need to get help there. They've lost Everson Griffin. They lost Yannick Ngakoue, who they got to replace Everson Griffin halfway through last year. And Hunter really needs a partner. I'm pretty sure Daniel Hunter's still there. I mean, I don't know at this point with how many of their edge rushers have gone. He could be gone. I wouldn't even notice, which is crazy. But it's then kind of a question of who to go. And this is where, to me, I'm definitely a big fan of Micah Parsons. I would have him in a board of mine, very high up there. I really like the talent that he brings. But I don't know, because I feel as if he'd probably fit as a 4-3 linebacker in this team, probably. So I feel a bit concerned if I was to go with him. So when I'm looking at the guys here, I'm going to be thinking of someone who I think that they could use in the future no matter what, because, I mean, who knows? Maybe Mike Zimmer is going to go sometime here soon, and the defense might change because this has been a team that's been struggling for a few years now, and I think that they're going to want to start changing scenery, maybe even as Kirk leaves. So I'm actually going to go with someone that I think is actually flexible as an outside linebacker and as a 4-3 edge, and it's going to be Gregory Russo. I like the talent that he brings coming out of the U, and I think that moving forward, whether you want to run him as a 4-3 edge, whether you want to run him as a 3-4 outside linebacker, he's someone that's going to be on your team. He's going to be able to produce, and he's going to be able to bring a lot to Minnesota to help out their young secondary, in which you could be looking at getting more secondary as well, but you have so much young secondary. At this point, go get a veteran. So.
All right, so now we are at pick 15 with New England Patriots. This is alongside my Denver one. Denver was more complicated just because I didn't have too much knowledge, and once I learned more about their situation and their needs and who would be the best player available for them at that spot. So I figured out what I wanted to do with Denver. Once I figured out what the Patriots needed, I have no idea what I want to do with them, because I don't know how much faith I don't know if they're going to bring back Cam Newton. And even with Cam Newton, I don't know. I don't think they have much of a ceiling. Obviously, you don't have anything with Jarrett Stidham. So I think that they are definitely a trade-up candidate for a quarterback. I'm not taking Mac Jones, so don't start writing him there, even though he could be a pick there. I've seen a lot of Kyle Pitts here because he just falls being that tight end that people are scared to take. He's definitely a skill position player. Micah Parsons. I don't like linebackers a lot, but I know that he and a guy like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah from Notre Dame can be really good impact players. And this is a good wide receiver draft. So I'm going to talk myself out of everything I'm thinking. If I didn't do this, I would say Rashad Bateman, which might be to some people a bit of a reach, but I would have him as my wide receiver 4. I think he's very underrated. But I'm going to go Micah Parsons here. I'll go Micah Parsons here for New England.
Interesting. Wondering when he was going to go off the board. I was definitely going to take him with my Raiders pick at 17. But realistically, I don't think Michael Parsons falls to 15, but just the way that we've drafted it based on team needs, I think that was a good pick. Now with the 16th pick, the Cardinals, I I think I'm gonna go just jump right in and go Kwity Paye. Now they just got JJ Watt we talked about earlier, but I think Hassan Reddick ultimately is gonna leave, and I think if you put Kwity Paye on the edge with Chandler Jones and JJ Watt on the inside of that 3-4 is really dangerous, and the Cardinals are going to score a lot of points, which generally means their opposition is going to be throwing. So to add another player with that pass rush, I think is a good move for them. And now with the Raiders pick at 17, they need playmakers on offense for sure, and their defense is pretty bad. So they're in an interesting spot, and people are always wondering, is John Gruden going to stick with Derek Carr? I think they will, so I'm not doing Mac Jones either. And I'm going to go I'm going to go JOK, linebacker Notre Dame, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. They need linebacker help, and I think that he's a playmaker on defense. You can line him up in the slot. You can line him up in a 4-3. You can line up a middle linebacker. He can play anywhere. So I'm going to go there.
All right. So one player, we're almost wrapping this up, and because we're going to finish with the 19th pick with the Washington football team. One player that I have seen definitely fall, and this is a player that has been very rangy in a lot of people's opinions, is Christian Barmore. I mentioned him earlier, interior defensive lineman. He's probably the number one guy on the board for that. He's definitely seen his stock rise since the college football playoff with Alabama. I'm not going to take him here with the Dolphins pick, but I just wanted to mention that I think he could have gone anywhere, and I definitely could have seen him going to the Raiders. But I do like that pick of JOK to the Raiders. They definitely do need defensive help. Now with the Dolphins, I'm looking at their depth chart right now because I'm wondering if I could take Christian Barmore here. But I think that they're somewhat comfortable with what they have at nose tackle. They run a 3-4 with their defensive scheme and Brian Flores. And he could go there, but I don't know if he's necessarily a good nose tackle fit or if he's more of a 3 technique for the defensive tackle spot. But that's definitely a spot where he can go. But like I said earlier with my number 3 overall pick, I want to help Tua Tagovailoa however I can. And so I'm going to go my top skill player here. I'm going to go Rashad Bateman, who I passed on with New England a little earlier. There are definitely some other players here. Kadarius Toney from Florida is the guy that you could talk about. But one player that I would really love to see with the Dolphins, a guy that they can use out of the slot and definitely a second-round guy, Rondell Moore out of Purdue, who his freshman year had so much hype because he was just a freak athlete, I'm pretty sure he led all freshmen in scrimmage yards. I think he probably led the NCAA in scrimmage yards, if I remember correctly. But he just had his last 2 seasons crippled by injury. But I still think when healthy, he's a freak of nature. So I think a guy like that working with Tua could really help. And I think Rashad Bateman is getting kind of underrated here in the draft process. But I think as we go forward, he'll end up being a first-round pick. So I think like a Bateman outside, you maybe still have Devontae Parker on the outside, and then you add in, say, like a Rondell Moore, and then maybe you find a running back in this draft. I think that the Dolphins have plenty of ability to get to a Tagovailoa, the offensive weapons, and then they have that defense still to make another run for the playoffs and maybe challenge the Bills for the AFC East. So I'm going Rashad Bateman here at 18. And let's wrap it up with the 19th pick with Kolbjorn with the Washington football team.
You've been ragging on him the whole time. I'm definitely not going to go Mac Jones, but you have been ragging on him the whole time. This is definitely a team that could look Mac Jones' way, particularly if he fell here. But I think Washington's going to make some sort of move free agency-wise just because you look at the slew of free agent quarterbacks there. I think there's someone that Rivera would be bound to like and will take. But most of the stuff that's been talked about, is like Marcus Mariota from the Las Vegas Raiders coming to Washington. Wouldn't hurt much with the cap. Yeah, he's only on 1 year, so he had to be re-signed if he played well, but it's not that much of a risk, and I think he'd be an upgrade. So I just don't think that quarterback really makes sense here for Washington, particularly if they're going to get one. I was thinking wide receiver too, but then Rashad Bateman got drafted, and I could go Kadarius Toney, but I kind of don't want to with this pick for Washington. I feel as if they're going to spend their money towards wide receiver anyways, so I don't think it'll end up being that big of a deal. And then I was definitely sad about the Owosu Karamoa pick. I really think that his dynamic play could be perfect in Washington and make the defense even more terrifying. So now I've only got a few guys left on my board right now for him, which is Tevin Jenkins, Samuel Cosme, and Elijah Vera Tucker. A mix between a couple left tackles and someone who's like right tackle but can also play right guard with his size. You could also throw Liam Eichenberg up here if you want to. He comes out of an offensive lineman school in Notre Dame, but a lot of people have been talking about the skills of Tevin Jenkins and Samuel Cosme, so I kind of want to go between those two. And I think there's a good bit of edge that is coming out of the Big 12, so I'm going to go with one of the left tackles from there. And I'm actually going to go ahead and go with Samuel Cosme with this pick. As I said, I think it's kind of a toss-up. I think it's more of this is where NFL scouts are really making their dollars. It's really kind of going between these prospects that you all look at and they all look really good, which one you'd want to go for. And I think Cosme, he's played some games at right tackle in his career at Texas, but he's played a majority of them at left. So if he doesn't quite work out on the left for you, you could swing him over to the right and he's still natural there. So I think overall he's going to fit in the Washington football team offensive line going forward. And for whatever quarterback that Washington gets, they need protection and they need to get strong protection, because you build a good defense and build a good O-line, the skill players will do the rest.
All right, so there you have it. Our, I guess, first edition of a mock draft. We haven't done a mock draft on our own here on 3304 Sports Podcast. So there you go, our first edition of our 2021 mock draft right here on the 3304 Sports Podcast. Be on the lookout for this episode and new episodes in the future on Anchor and Spotify. Also be on the lookout for our special edition Beat Writer podcasts. One just dropped with Andy Losi and the men's and women's Virginia Tech tennis team beat writers here on 3304 Sports. Be on the lookout for that. I want to thank Kolbjorn for joining me again. I want to thank Brady for joining us this week. I want to wish you all good health and a good rest of your week. See you next time, everybody.